So hello again, boys and girls. Now we got our clutch job done and working to absolute perfection, believe it or not. Boy, hard work does pay off sometimes, doesn't it? And I've been driving the truck again. Realized I had another problem to fix. Not to do with the clutch at all. A while back, when I was doing all the work and straightening out the ignition and the electrical system and the fuel system and the brakes and everything else, I decided I was going to desmog this motor, this truck. Now, if you don't know what that means, 70s, they started coming up with some rudimentary emissions control devices. Now, there was a mistake made on my part, and many other people, by the way. Everybody thinks emissions is power robbing, and it doesn't, give you any better performance. It saps power out of the motor. It doesn't work after a while. Well, part of that's true, part of that's not. So let me explain. What I did was, this system has something called an air system, AIR, which has to do with air injection, responsiveness, reactive, I don't know. But there's this air pump down here. Most people call it a smog pump. It runs off the crank with a belt. As you can see, the belt's gone. And there are some hoses that pump air out. It goes into a piping system that's part of your EGR system, which also is not there. I took the EGR valve off and blocked that off. And a lot of other little bits and pieces. There's another plate right there. You see that little plug sitting next to it. Anyway, getting complicated, but it throws the air around the backside through a pipe, and the pipe just come here and inject itself into the exhaust manifold. The idea being, you put some fresh air into the exhaust, any unburned hydrocarbons coming out of the exhaust, the air will react with the hot gases and burn that. Now, this is a non-catalyst truck. It didn't have a catalytic converter yet. They went to that in '79. This just has a straight pipe and a muffler. Single downpipe. Stock exhaust manifold. So ripped all that stuff off, and I figured, well, desmog it, just going to take everything out. There's this, there's hoses, there's the vacuum valve right that used to go right there, and there was some stuff that used to be mounted over here, and a whole mess and tangle of vacuum lines. You know the story. And there's also this black canister here, the charcoal canister. So that came out too. Well, what's it doing back in, you ask? There's the moral of our story today. I pulled all this stuff out. For some reason, I didn't take this out, and that's actually part of what I'm going to be talking about. I read all these desmog threads, how to desmog your Toyota 20R, 22R. A lot of threads, Yoda Tech and Toyota Nation, there's several others. And they said, just rip all that stuff out of there. Plug off any of the unused ports. You can see my plugs here. Pulled a vacuum tree off of here and put a metal plug in there. Did that. But ever since I did that, it starts up right away. It runs great. It's got high idle. Warms up fairly quick. Goes down to low idle, beautiful. Low idle's okay. It runs fine. Except when you get up to full operating temperature and you shut it off. And then if you try to restart it anywhere within 5 minutes to an hour, it actually gets flooded. It never did that before. And I couldn't figure out why. Now, I don't normally run this truck on a stop and go basis like that, shut it off and then get back in 5, 10, 15 minutes later and go again. So it hasn't been a problem. So I've been putting it off for a while. Now I want to fix it. Because it's just not right. But not to bore you with all the research, and I'm not going to. I hear you jumping up and down and dancing and screaming, thank God. But what turns out is this. What I had done was rip this canister out of here. Disconnect these hoses, rip it out. There's a hose coming out of the bottom that goes to the atmosphere. It's the way it's supposed to be. This hose goes to this quote-unquote return line from the carburetor. This hose used to go to this vacuum switch, and there was a vacuum line that went from here to where I got this plugged off, right there. And this goes to this quote-unquote fuel return line. Now, I thought it was kind of weird when I was taking it out, because I'm like, that's kind of weird. Why would you put a fuel return line through charcoal and send it back to the tank? Aren't you gonna kind of get charcoal stuff in your gas? It doesn't make sense. Turns out, Toyota didn't do it the way they used to do in the old days, where you had a feed line coming up for your gas and into your carb, and then an overflow port where liquid gas would come out and go back to your tank. This is not a fluid line. I bent it up, custom out of steel fuel line, and put a whole new one in because the old one was rusty. But it turns out it's just a vapor line. When it gets warm, or your gas gets sloshed around, or when you fill up your vehicle at the gas station, gasoline warms up and it expands, and it's volatile. It creates vapor. And vapor comes up, and this is a vent line for those vapors for the gas tank. Same thing happens with the carburetor on this return line. You can see that's above the sight glass. The fuel level's about here. So this is up in a vapor space. Ooh, that's bad. Need to fix that split. So if it gets hot and you shut it off, you get something called a heat soak. It's just normal. It's mounted to a hot piece of metal. It's an engine. And the heat gets in here and it boils the gas. This happens. It's normal. But when it boils, it creates vapor, which creates pressure. And the vapor comes out this hose, which used to go into this hose, which went into the charcoal canister. Charcoal canister is designed to trap fuel vapor. It's trapping the vapor from the carb, and it's trapping the vapor from the gas tank. This third line is a purge line. This valve, which used to operate off a coolant, when coolant got to a certain heat, it would actually open that valve. And it had an electrical connection on it too. And that would signal the little tiny computer I have in there and send a signal to this bugger and tell it to open up. And when that opened up, it started pulling vacuum from the carburetor, which went back here and would pull vacuum off the canister and pull those fuel vapors out and push them into the carburetor so you can burn them instead of them going out into the air and polluting the air. Not a bad idea. In fact, not bad at all. But it's got these electrical devices and thermal devices because they only want it to happen when you're at a higher temperature, full operating temperature, and past a certain speed, which is like 1500 RPM or above, or 1800 or something like that. So, now that I've totally confused you, I was confused myself, but hey, the way these things are. I'm going to put this charcoal canister back in. What was happening is I shut the truck off and it was percolating and that tank was hot, and I had the return line actually connected to the tank vent line, so it was nothing but pressure, and if I got vapor coming from the tank, it's actually pressurizing the bowl, and the vapor had nowhere to go except up the vent tubes. These go right down to the bowl. And this vapor was spilling out and just dropping through the carburetor and dropping into the intake manifold. So you go to start it hot, and it's full of vapor, which won't burn because it's too rich. There's too much of it. You have to crank it and crank it and crank it before it starts to kick. And then it'll kick a few times like it wants to start, and then you see a bunch of white plume cloud coming out from under the hood. That's all that gas vapor. But once you do that for a while, it will eventually start. It can take 20 or 30 seconds of cranking, though, and that's not good for your starter, your battery, or anything else. It should be able, when it's warm, to just hit the key for a half second to a second, and it should start right up. This system, this charcoal canister, allows the vapors coming out of here to come through this tube and into the canister and not go down in there in the carb and basically flood it out. Got me so far? That allows your good hot start without having to crank it excessively to clear it. I didn't know this. Didn't have a clue about it. My experiences with older American cars. Before 70, there were bowl vents, but they usually had a tube like this that went down there somewhere and it just vented to the atmosphere. Same with the gas tank. It had a tube on the tank and it used to just vent to the atmosphere, or the fuel tank cap was vented. If it built up too much pressure, a valve in it would open and it would release the pressure. This one is not vented at all. Not normally. It will vent if it gets pressure in it, because it's got a pressure relief valve in it. But otherwise, it's a sealed system. But in the old days, again, pre-70, gas tank and carburetors were just vented to the atmosphere. This is what caused the old LA smog you might have seen or heard about if you're younger than I am, which a lot of you are. No fair asking about age. But that stuff would get up in the atmosphere, mix with the sunlight, and create smog. The government started doing this to try to cut down the smog and the pollution. Also, since it was being vented out to the atmosphere, it wasn't building up in your carburetor, and your hot starts were okay. No problem. So, here's the problem. Here's the solution. This is what we're going to do. We're putting the canister back in. I'm going to put all new lines on here. That's 5/16 fuel line. That goes to the bowl vent. These two are 1/4 inch. This one's going to go to the gas tank vent right here. This one I got to modify a bit. Don't be scared about not having this piece and that piece over there. It doesn't matter, because the Canadian versions of this were actually a lot simpler than the American ones. This can be open all the time. Basically, I've got to get 1/4 inch line, cut it, put a 1/4 inch to 1/8 inch reducer, put a little piece of vacuum line, and get it on that port right there. That's a ported vacuum. It's the same type as for your vacuum advance for your distributor. You're only supposed to get more vacuum on it when the engine's accelerating, when it's going faster, speeding up. That advances your timing. When it's at idle, there's almost no vacuum on that at all, or none. And that's so you have your base timing, your 8 degrees before, 5 degrees before, 0, whatever your setting is. Which is a good thing, because if that canister is full of vapor, you don't want to draw that vapor in while it's trying to idle hot, low idle, because it's going to mess up your mixture and it's not going to idle well at all. These controls were just Toyota's way and the Japanese way of trying to be more precise about things, to make sure it only opened at certain times in certain temperature conditions and only at certain levels of vacuum. I understand. But you know what? This purge line, which is the center one, down in this thing is a check valve. It's a little ball and a spring. Excuse me. The spring's on top, the ball's underneath. When there's no pressure on it, it's pushing the ball down and it's closing that port, and it's got that thing sealed. When this thing starts getting vacuum, it starts pulling that ball up and opening the port, allowing the vapors in that can to come out, mixed with fresh air from that bottom tube, which I can't exactly show you, but it's there, and come up this tube, boom, and into the carb below the butterflies, and be burned. Now, this isn't a problem, I don't think. Because quite frankly, you start it cold in the morning, if there's vapor in there, You're automatically on high idle anyway with your choke closed. It's not going to hurt a thing. It'll evacuate that thing in a hurry. As you're running, you're not creating a whole bunch of vapor. If you are, it's going in there and being stored. But again, that check valve is only going to open when you get into the gas. You start getting this engine up above 1500 to 1800, and let me tell you, for these little motors, that's starting to be significant. They redline at about 4000. That's kind of screaming. So you got to kind of be moving, and you're going to be using it up as you go. No problem. You don't need the extra controls. It will work. So, moral of the story. If you desmog one of these motors in one of these trucks, or even a Corolla or Celica or anything else, 18R, 20R, 22R, anything like that with the carburetor, you're going to keep the basic carburetor, keep the canister, and get it hooked up. Let it catch those vapors and do its job. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard start problem like I've been. And you're going to be stuck for a while until the thing cools down and then it'll want to start. It's just, it takes that much time for the vapors down the carburetor and the exhaust and the intake manifold to just dissipate. Also, you don't want that gas vapor going down in there and leaking past your rings and contaminating your oil. That's a pain. That's liable to lead to big trouble. That's another reason I want to get this fixed. So, I'm going to get it hooked up and see what we can do. And I'm pretty sure it's going to work. I'll post some results later, just in case anything goes wrong or right, just so you know. But there you go. Information, big nutshell. Again, sorry to ramble, but hey, a lot of information here, a lot to go over. Excuse me. And just going to go around here so you can see what's going on. This vacuum line goes around here to the choke pull-off. That's the vacuum advance. There's one more vacuum that goes here. Oh, that's the choke pull-off. This is a throttle positioner. But those are the only three vacuum lines I'm running. And if my brake booster was good, I would actually have my brake booster hooked up down there. But brake booster's leaking, so that's why it's not hooked up. I got it capped. Not a problem. But otherwise, everything else gets capped. This is not intended to serve as a desmog tutorial, by the way. Go to Yoda Tech. There's two good write-ups on there, but the one thing they don't mention, and I plan on correcting this soon. Well, you keep the stock carb, or get a Weber. Yeah, if you get a Weber, you can pull the canister because then you really don't need it. You can use the old vent line for the tank as a return because the Weber carb, gas actually does come into it, and that gas actually comes back out of it. Just like the older carburetors. The stock Edison carburetors from Toyota, they don't do that. It's vapor. So that's why you shouldn't pull that canister. That's why I had trouble. So there you go. End of nutshell. End of spiel. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Hope this really helps somebody. Also, I'm going to, at the end of this, I'm going to put some diagrams up that I found on this system. Basically a schematic diagram showing you the routing and how it works. You can pause the video and read it if you need to. And you'll see how this all works. So there you go. Talk to you next time. There we go. All done. Tank to there. Carb to there. Purge in the middle to there. By the way, 1/8 to 1/4 adapter. Take the place of that. There you go. That's what it looks like done. Stay tuned for the diagrams, I promise. They're coming up right at the end.